See, I'd like to start this funny, because it's been a while since we've had a funny intro. Can I get one more suggestion, please? Sasquatch. Bigfoot had a big... What, do I get canceled for that nowadays? You know, I think people tend to give millionaires way too much credit. I know that sounds crazy, but hear me out. I think there's this idea that because you have a 7-figure net worth, you're this brilliant, methodical genius that had every step of your real estate journey mapped out from the very beginning. When the truth of the matter is, my mistakes are exactly what made me a millionaire, not my intelligence. Mistakes are how I learned what not to do in my business, which then ultimately leads to me running a more efficient business, which ultimately leads to me making more money in my business. So today I'm gonna walk you through the 8 mistakes that helped me grow a $10 million real estate portfolio and some of the lessons learned from said mistakes. Let's get into number 1 here, which is buying my first house in Kansas City. So here's the mistake that I made with that property. My wife and I could not afford it, we should not have qualified for it, and we certainly shouldn't have bought it because we learned that home ownership is A, just very hard, but B, very expensive. You know, a lot of people think you buy a house and it's like you live in it, you put a couch in it, and a bed, nothing else, and then you just have this like happily ever after life, when the reality is that stuff breaks on you all the time and you gotta fix it or you gotta hire someone to fix it. And in an apartment, you have a maintenance crew that usually takes care of everything for you. But early on, something just didn't feel right to me about the idea of paying rent to somebody when I could feasibly own a home and just build equity. I didn't fully understand this concept when I bought the house. When I went to sell the house, and I realized that this $159,000 house that I bought had appreciated to $215,000, which is about $55,000 of equity. That math is pretty much right, I think. 56,000, come on, cut me some slack, that was pretty good. So big mistake buying this house because I really wasn't financially ready for it. The thing that I really learned once we sold it was that appreciation in equity can change your life overnight. Well, we lived in the house for 2 years, so it wasn't overnight, but it felt like overnight because we lived in this house. And then one day we looked at prices and we were like, holy moly, we can make a lot of money if we just sold this thing. Which leads me to mistake number 2, selling my house in Kansas City. So we saw the equity go up and we took the money and we ran, like most people do. I think a lot of people can probably relate to seeing their house double or go up 25% and say, hey man, I could use $50,000 to $100,000 to sell this thing and get out of it. And that's exactly what happened when we saw our $159,000 house go up to $215,000 in value. So we took the money and ran, and that really just didn't sit right with me because that was a moment that I realized that, you know, hey, if I had this appreciation on this house and I just did that many times over, I could build my wealth that way. So what I should have done was kept the house and pull the money out when I needed it. But guess what? I didn't know about cash out refis. I didn't really know about renting it out. I didn't know that much about real estate. Anyway, the lesson that I learned there was that real estate is really something that you should hold on to at all costs. And that one really did get me down a little bit for like the next year or two because I felt like I made this big mistake selling it. And bonus mistake here, after closing costs and everything like that, we had a profit of $40,000. And at that time we were about $80,000 in student loan debt. And my wife was like, hey, let's pay off half of our debt. And we had this $40,000 and I was like, no, I don't want to do that. I don't want to pay the debt because $40,000 isn't even gonna get rid of the debt, and thus our life won't be changed from paying off the debt. We'll only have half the amount of debt, but we're still gonna pay the same amount every month. And I was like, I'd rather just hold on to it. I don't know why. They wanna buy a house with it, I don't know. And my wife was like really pushing us to pay off student loan debts. And if I'm being honest, we probably should have listened, but I didn't wanna pay off the debt because it felt nice to have $40,000 in my bank account that I could use whenever I wanted. Anyways, that's a bonus mistake. That's mistake 2B. All right, the first one, mistake 2A was selling my house in Kansas City. Mistake 2B was not nixing half of my $80,000 student loan debt, which as Mr. David Ramsey would say is stupid. Mistake number 3 was moving to Los Angeles, California. So my wife and I weren't making a ton of money in Kansas City. Collectively, we're making $80,000 and barely honestly scraping by after you figured our $1,000 mortgage, $1,000 in credit card debt, $1,000 in student loan debt, miscellaneous bills and all that kind of stuff. So I think we had about $1,000 extra every month after all of our bills, sometimes less. So we weren't living paycheck to paycheck, but we weren't saving money at all. And so we told ourselves, hey, why instead of living in this really affordable city of Kansas City where our mortgage is only $1,100 every month, why don't we just move to Los Angeles where everything is significantly more expensive? And then we were like, yeah, sure, that sounds fun. I think we listed our house within a month or two of making that decision. And we moved to a city that my wife and I certainly couldn't afford and was completely out of our financial wheelhouse. But we knew we needed something new, and I just wanted something more that I didn't feel like I could get from Kansas City. So it's sort of when I realized or learned that sometimes you just need change in your life to be inspired again to pursue whatever dreams you have. Because we were really comfortable, but we really couldn't didn't advance our financial situations. And just to sum this one up, I think that's just when I realized / learned that stability breeds complacency. So bad financial decision to move to a way more expensive city, but it really paved the way for what would come next. Mistake number 4 was launching my very first Airbnb unit without knowing what the hell I was doing. If you're wondering, like, what did you bleep out? It's like the word that ends with ELL, but last time I said the bad version of crap, we got demonetized on YouTube, so. Your poop mouth, poop out of your mouth. Anyways, I had no idea what I was doing. At this point, I had heard about Airbnb and I had known a couple of people that were doing Airbnb and making money on Airbnb. And I was always such a side hustle guy that I was like, oh my gosh, if I can make an extra like $500, I'd be super happy. So at the same time, my wife and I were looking at houses. We'll get into that mistake here in a second. And I decided, you know what, let's list this apartment on Airbnb and let's figure it out. And my wife was like, are you sure this is gonna work? Are you sure we're gonna make money? I was like, I have no idea if this is gonna work, but I'm pretty sure. I think it could work. And I just listed it on Airbnb without really having done too much research, especially as it pertained to running a smooth Airbnb business. And it was a pretty crazy decision to make willy-nilly, but I was just so excited at the premise of making like an extra $500,000 every single month. But I learned that sometimes you just have to try and see where it takes you without thinking about it too much, because if I had sat there and researched and read all the articles and watched all the non-existent raw built YouTube videos that were out there, then I probably would have gotten stuck in analysis paralysis and never have gotten started. Which leads me to mistake number 5, which, like I said, remember I listed my apartment on Airbnb, and the reason I did that was because I just, again, like the way I felt in Kansas City when I was renting, I just did not like paying $1,850 a month in rent to live in a 666 square foot apartment. Yeah, I know, the devil's number. And I just felt like I was throwing away this money versus building equity, which is something that I learned was super important from selling my first house in Kansas City. So I was like, you know what? We're gonna buy this house, babe. Let's do it. And she's like, can we afford it? And I was like, heck no, we can't afford it. And we bought this house and it was so expensive for us at that time. Our Kansas City house was $159K and our LA house was literally like 3-4 times that amount. And my parents and I had friends that would ask me how much it cost, and I was petrified to tell them the truth because I just didn't want them to judge me for buying what seemed like a very stupid decision at the time. And admittedly, it kind of was, because we certainly couldn't afford a $624,000 house when we could barely afford to move to LA when we did. But we had gotten raises from our jobs, so I just kind of felt like maybe we could finagle our way into this house. And I remember when I was searching for houses, asking myself, how can I afford this? Not, can I afford this? Putting a how in front of that question really changed my mindset. And this is when I learned a really important lesson, that there's a creative solution to every problem you have in life. It's not an easy solution all the time, but there are creative ways to attack problems that you're facing. I couldn't afford this home, so I said, how can I afford it? I can afford it if I can find a home with the mother-in-law suite or a bonus room or an ADU, anything that could allow me to supplement my mortgage through renting out these spaces, which is exactly what ended up happening. I bought a house with a 279 square foot apartment underneath it, and I used the money that I got in rent from that apartment to help subsidize my $4,400 mortgage. But on top of that, my lot was pretty big. I think it was like 6,500 square feet, and I had all this space in my backyard to build an accessory dwelling unit. And since I was making money with that little studio apartment I was telling you about, I was like, man, if I could build a tiny house in my backyard, I'm gonna be living it up. So that leads me to mistake number 6, which was building a tiny house in my backyard and only getting one bid on that construction when I got started. So I had no construction experience at all other than DIYing my way through all the different projects that I ever took on with my first home, or the home that I had just bought in LA. I was so broke, I was so cheap, I couldn't afford to pay contractors or tradesmen or anything like that to perform the work, so I would do DIY. And that was my only level of construction experience. And really number 6 is like a bunch of mistakes, like thinking tiny homes, because they were tiny, would be very cheap to construct and could be banged out in like 2 weeks or less. I got one quote from a contractor that was $40,000, and I was like, I can do that, I could figure that out, $40,000, let's do it, you're hired. And I never corroborated his quote by getting any other quote. And that was a really big mistake that I made, because the tiny house ended up costing me like $72,000 and took about 13 months to finish from beginning to end. I've got plenty of videos about this tiny house if you want to check those out after this video. So anyways, very over budget, and I learned the importance of contractor vetting and just doing your due diligence on what costs are for construction, especially in LA, where the costs are significantly higher than everywhere else in the nation. Which leads me to mistake number 7, which is overspending at the beginning of a project. Instead of pacing myself and seeing what I could work in on my wish list at the very end of the construction, I kind of went all out at the very beginning and didn't really pace myself at all. I decided to go all in from the very beginning because I was like, oh, it's only gonna be $40,000. These extra things will only cost me a couple bucks more. Was very wrong there. Very wrong. Which is exactly why I ran out of money on my first major project. And this eventually led to me kicking out my crew and finishing the final 30 to 40% of the tiny home construction, all by myself. And a couple of friends that would pitch in here and there, of course. But for the most part, like, I was the one that was assembling cabinets, hanging cabinets, painting walls, putting shiplap, doing the final plumbing and the final electrical. I mean, it was really, really difficult for me. That was definitely one of the hardest periods of my life, but I actually learned the basics of construction by doing this. But because I was doing everything, it was very inefficient and it actually delayed the timeline a lot. So I think the most important lesson that I learned from building this tiny house was to outsource everything. And from the moment I built that house, I've never touched a hammer again, and I've hired out crews to do everything professionally. Last mistake, number 8, perhaps the most significant mistake that I've made. And that mistake was taking on so many partners and using OPM, other people's money, to scale my business. Now just hear me out for a second. When I was scaling up and didn't have money or the funds to continue buying real estate, I mastered the art of partnering up with people and utilizing other people's money to help scale my portfolio. And let me be clear, that's a very great thing, especially when you're first getting started, because it can allow you to supercharge your portfolio using other people's money. And I've had great relationships with all of them. All my partners have been really, really good to me. I still love all of them, and I would still partner with them over and over and over again. All right, so this isn't really coming from a place of like, mistakes have been made, partnerships have been dissolved. No. All of my partnerships and investor relationships have been amazing for my portfolio. But what I've started to realize is that while it's allowed me to scale, it hasn't really allowed me to scale in the way that I was hoping for or in the way that I wanted to. Because when I work with that many sets of partners or investors, that's how many people that I have to communicate with on a daily basis and perform for at a certain level, right? Have good performance in the portfolio and then report back to them just outside of communicating over the day-to-day operations. So the lesson that I've learned is that if I want to truly scale, I have to fundraise at a much larger and scalable level, which is exactly why I'm launching Raw Built Capital, which is my fund for accredited investors. And this will allow me to raise money for much bigger projects instead of the single one-off acquisitions. And what this means would be, instead of me buying a single home with an investor and then finding another investor and having to, work with them and explain to them and educate them on short-term rentals, and then doing that again and again and again, which can take a very long time just to get from the beginning of that conversation to actually closing and then launching it. Like, that's all very difficult to scale. But my goal for Raw Built Capital is I want to raise $20 million a year. My big goal is $100 million in the next 5 years, and deploying those into very large RV parks and then converting them into upscale glamping resorts, or just building cool, crazy projects that would crush it on short-term rental platforms like my tiny house village in Tennessee, that we're actually like working on that now and it's finally happening. I'm like really excited. But by raising money this way, I can scale into really cool projects at a much faster rate. It's all to say, this lesson is one that has significantly impacted where my life is gonna go, and I'm really excited about it. So if you're an accredited investor and you're interested in investing in Raw Built Capital, we're not quite launched yet, but we're pretty close. I'll leave a link in the description down below for you. This video was not meant to be a plug for Raw Built Capital, seeing to that it's not really launched yet, but hopefully it gives you an idea of where I'm heading as I learn all of these incredibly valuable lessons from these giant, mega, catastrophic mistakes that I've made over the past 5 or 6 years. So what exactly are the takeaways here? Most of my mistakes came as a result of taking action. And because of taking action, those mistakes have led to my $10 million plus real estate portfolio. And I really wish I could have spent like 3 hours just detailing how every single one of these mistakes led to the next thing, which led to the next thing, which led to the next thing, which led to the next thing. All I can really say is that they are all intricately tied together, and they all led me to this exact moment. And the intelligence that I now have that I didn't have when I started is in direct correlation with the dumb mistakes and the dumb things I did when I was first getting started and even after I got started. So I think if you're serious about getting into real estate, it's important to make mistakes. And in fact, you should embrace mistakes. You should embrace failure. A lot of people don't ever want to get started because they're scared of failing. And so they never get started. But here's the truth, and here's the secret that a lot of people won't tell you. You're gonna fail, and it's fine. It's okay, you have to fail. Failure is the predecessor of success. You can't have success without failing first. And if you do, congratulations. You're like the one person on earth that's ever done that. But if you're like me and the 99.99999% of people, you're gonna fail, and that's okay. You're gonna make mistakes, and those mistakes, my friends, will make you a millionaire. All right, catch you on the next episode of Raw Built. Okay, final thing before the video actually ends, I wanted to say that on March 23rd at 8 p.m. Central Standard Time, I am gonna be hosting a free short-term rental workshop that goes over really so much topical stuff that's going on, overcoming the Airbnb bust, how to make your short-term rental business more more recession resistant, ways that I'm personally investing in Airbnbs. Maybe I'll even tell you about the $1 million offer that I just placed yesterday. So yeah, if you want to go to that, click the link down below, save your spot. We have about 50 left, so hopefully I'll get to meet some of my YouTube audience. And we're also gonna be doing a live Q&A as it pertains to real estate and short-term rentals and tiny homes and everything in between. So if you've got questions, bring them, get ready, reserve your spot, click the link down below, and I will see you this Thursday. All right, for real, bye.